On this week's edition of Politicat, we'll be covering the results of the Nevada primary. Take a look back on former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia's life and what lies ahead. And a discussion about the South Carolina primary and former Florida Governor Jeb Bush's campaign suspension. These are your politics right now on Politicat. Trump scored big and Hillary scored just big enough to win their respective caucuses in Nevada. I'm Fallon Gallagher, and tonight I'm joined by Northwestern College Democrats Vice President of Membership David Gernon and former Northwestern College Republicans President Dominic Burke. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
This week, both parties traveled out west for the Nevada caucus. Donald Trump swept his third straight primary with 45.9% of the vote, followed by Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, respectively. Hillary Clinton experienced another narrow but clearer primary victory with 52.6% of the vote compared to Bernie Sanders' 47.3%. Clinton has consistently relied on her firewall of African-American supporters. So, David, what does Clinton's 5-point win tell us about Bernie's ability to win the primary vote?
Well, I think this was always sort of the long-term picture of the Democratic primary, right? I mean, Bernie maybe was going to do well in sort of the more homogeneous states like Iowa and New Hampshire, but then once we got further along in the season, the more diverse electorates were going to help Hillary because of her sort of ability to score well with them and things like that. And so, I think when Bernie started his campaign, you saw sort of some tensions between him and different groups such as Black Lives Matter. Bernie seems to sort of think that a lot of the roots of these problems are economic, whereas maybe these groups feel differently. I don't know if we're really here for a philosophical discussion like that, but I do think that we see in Nevada, just sort of evidence backing up what people have thought for a long time, which is that the more diverse states, the more diverse electorates are going to favor Hillary Clinton.
And many younger voters have been feeling the burn. Where were these voters, and what does their absence mean for Bernie in future primaries? Well,
it's certainly not good. Bernie has sort of campaigned on this promise of a political revolution of sorts. He was going to inspire first-time voters to come out to the polls. He was going to inspire, maybe sections of the Democratic Party who don't normally vote or who normally vote other ways to sort of join him and coalesce behind him in sort of this political revolution. So to have turnout even, not even equal to 2008 and 2012, but actually less than those years is really not a good sign for him going forward because, it just illustrates that maybe this political revolution is not going to happen. Now, you also don't want to sort of overemphasize, short-term trends in the longer term. But, Nevada is a state where there's generally not that much turnout, and there's usually, a more homogeneous electorate. But, I do think it does spell trouble for Bernie long-term.
And Donald Trump overwhelmingly dominated the Nevada caucus and also trumped Ted Cruz, with Marco Rubio just barely bypassing Cruz for a second-place finish. Many voters have been lauding Trump for as the anti-establishment candidate. But after the caucus, Rubio said, quote, "A majority of Republican voters in this country do not want Donald Trump to be the nominee," end quote. So, Dominic, do you still think it's possible we'll see an anti-Trump candidate in the general election?
Well, it's certainly very possible, particularly when you look at the second choice opinion polling, and practically no Republican primary voters that aren't supporting Donald Trump have Donald Trump listed as their second choice candidate. It's also interesting as we move forward and you see Ted Cruz in recent weeks has started to slip slightly with some of the controversies in his campaign, and Marco Rubio picking up steam as you look ahead as we go into places like Virginia. With Rubio polling clearly second behind Donald Trump. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the Cruz campaign, and the earlier either Cruz or Rubio blink, the earlier you might see the chance of an establishment candidate, if you will.
Okay. Well, we'll see Trump's success translate to the Super Tuesday primaries this week. One of the leading conservative voices of the U.S. Supreme Court passed away almost 2 weeks ago. Justice Antonin Scalia served for the Supreme Court for 30 years, and his passing has set the stage for a political battle in the Capitol. NNN's Alex Letterman has more.
On a snowy President's Day in Washington, the Capitol is thinking not of the executive, but the judiciary. One of the most influential judges of the past half-century, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia died Saturday of natural causes. He was 79.
Whatever one thinks of the particular views that Justice Scalia espoused in his judicial writing and otherwise, he was a giant in the law, and he was brilliant.
Scalia pioneered an approach to constitutional law called originalism, making constitutional judgments based on the original meaning of the text. Over 30 years, he became a leading conservative voice on the court.
I'm concerned about the wisdom of this court imposing, through the Constitution, a requirement of action which is unpalatable to many of our citizens for religious reasons.
Illinois Democratic Senator Dick Durbin said, "While our opinions on the law and jurisprudence were frequently at odds, he was steadfast and true to his beliefs during his tenure." His Republican colleague Mark Kirk tweeted, "R.I.P. Justice Antonin Scalia, one of the greatest constitutional scholars to ever serve U.S. on bench." Justice Scalia's death could change the ideological orientation of the court for a generation, and with 2016 an election year, Republicans are sure to try and delay President Obama's nomination until after the 2016 election. While Obama called on the Senate for a fair hearing and timely vote for his nominee, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said the American people should have a voice in the selection of their next Supreme Court justice. Therefore, this vacancy should not be filled until we have a new president. But the People for the American Way, a progressive advocacy group, stood out in the snow Monday to protest a potential delayed nomination.
The Supreme Court is just too important to be held hostage to the same kind of partisan gridlock that's ruined so much of the rest of Washington.
From Washington, Alex Letterman, NNN.
Obama has successfully appointed both Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan. In a SCOTUS blog post, Obama stated 3 qualities he wants to see in Scalia's successor, quote, a sterling record, end quote, quote, a deep respect for the judiciary role, and an understanding of the way the world really works, end quote. What are your thoughts on the new potential candidates and the political implications that'll come with Obama's choice?
Well, the political implications are interesting, particularly when you look at what's currently on the court's docket, with cases regarding immigration, with cases regarding gun control and the such. It's interesting that the president says he wants a judge with the deep respect for the judiciary role to be the next to be the next Supreme Court justice. When you consider the difference and the kind of political difference between the president and the Senate Republicans right now, is what is a deep respect and what is the role of the judiciary. And we've seen from this president, he's willing to circumvent the law. He's willing to go above and beyond the legislative process to achieve his political results. And I think you see the Republicans saying, well, no, let's honor tradition. Let's not appoint someone right now. And simply because, not because they disagree with necessarily anyone the president is suggesting or might be suggesting, but simply because we know what the president's view of the court is and the rule of law is. So it's interesting to see as we hear come some straw man names suggested, the GOP governor of Nevada, Sandoval, for example. Kind of you see the politics of it in the White House perhaps playing popular politics and attempting to make it look like the Republicans are blocking moderate nominees, and it's straw man politics at its finest.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that Obama noted he wants a judge with an understanding of the way the world really works, considering there's been at least 5 examples of judges nominated or confirmed in election years in the past 80 years. You know, I think politically there are sort of 2 routes President Obama could go in choosing a successor. You know, he could go for sort of a more symbolic choice, a very liberal sort of judge who agrees with him on a lot of stances and things like that, who certainly has no chance of being confirmed. And then the other route he could go is a more moderate route, trying to find a judge who perhaps could actually be, you know, nominated and confirmed in this election year, in this tumultuous time. You know, I think the Nevada governor today said he is taking his name out of consideration for the nominee, and so I think that just kind of speaks to the tumultuous time we live in of political polarization. You know, he's a fairly moderate governor with a moderate record, and for him to remove his name so early in the process of a you know, for an esteemed position, I think just speaks to the polarization of today's America.
Well, we'll keep you updated with more coverage as the search for Scalia's successor continues. Trump swept another primary in South Carolina last week, winning 32.5% of the vote, with Rubio and Cruz neck and neck behind him. But the real news from this race surrounds fourth-place candidate Jeb Bush. After a series of disappointing finishes, Bush has officially suspended his campaign for president. But both John Kasich and Ben Carson finished behind Bush and are continuing their campaigns. So Dominic, what does Bush's suspension mean for the other GOP candidates?
Well, it's kind of a sign that, once again, this election year isn't a usual election year when you consider the idea that the man who just a year ago I was on this program and we were talking about how Jeb Bush is the presumptive Republican nominee for President of the United States. And he polls at, what, 4%, 5% nationwide by the time he drops out. And this goes back to this whole 2016 kind of year of strange occurrences where you have Rick Santorum and Mike Huckabee, the last two winners of the Republican primary in Iowa, both dropping out so early in the campaign. You have it's unpredictable, and I think that is what it means for the other candidates, particularly John Kasich and Ben Carson. We assume they're going to drop out. We're assumed they're going to have to at one point, and you kind of hear the Republican establishment now calling that everyone has to unify behind Marco Rubio. We'll see whether that's true, but I think we'll know by March 15th when we start getting to the winner-take-all states is what really matters here, is when you're really going to see what it means for the other candidates with how many establishment candidates are left and how many factions still exist at that point.
And the Democrats will head to South Carolina this Saturday. South Carolina Representative Jim Clyburn recently endorsed Clinton as both a South Carolina representative and an African American. How do you think this endorsement will affect both Democratic campaigns in this primary, David?
Well, I think it comes as no surprise that he endorsed Hillary. Hillary has a long record of sort of securing endorsements for this election. I think it speaks to her strength, her organizational strength in South Carolina. Bernie has pretty much given up on the state. His schedule, he was in for the town hall earlier this week, but since then he hasn't even been in the state, and I don't think he'll return until the day of the primary. So I think, just based on that, you can see he's kind of given up on the state already, due to the earlier mentioned, perhaps, Clinton's African-American firewall. I think this also bodes well for Hillary Clinton heading into Super Tuesday, when a lot of southern states with similar electorates to South Carolina will vote. So yeah, I think, just another more bad news for Bernie.
Well, Barack Obama won the 2008 primary before eventually winning the nomination. We'll see how the 2016 winner whether they will have his same fate. Tune in Tuesday at 7 o'clock for more Super Tuesday coverage. And that'll do it for this edition of Politicat. For all of us here at NNN, I'm Fallon Gallagher, saying thank you for watching and have a great night. But before we end, what are your guys' thoughts on how Super Tuesday is going to go?
Well, it'll be interesting on the Republican side. I think we're going to see if the polls are correct, which at this point we see still so much flexibility depending on where you're looking at the poll. And with such small margins, the polling is, of course, difficult. It obviously looks like Donald Trump will have another strong night on Super Tuesday. What's really going to matter is kind of the breakdown between Rubio and Cruz on the Republican side to see who can get enough delegates in the proportional delegation going into the winner-take-all states. Which one of them can get enough to survive that once they get there, there's still someone alive. And then perhaps by that time, you might see some type of Republican commentators now talking about some type of Cruz-Rubio combination.
What do you think, David?
Yeah, on the Democratic side, I sort of touched on this earlier, but I think this has sort of long been awaited as sort of perhaps the day that'll deal the knockout blow to Bernie Sanders' campaign. Especially if, as expected, a lot of these states end up voting Hillary's way. I think it may prove too much for Bernie to overcome. Now, he has raised a lot of money, even breaking Obama's record in 2008 of grassroots contributions. So there's probably no shortage of cash on hand for the campaign to continue. But I think it'll be a tough day for his campaign, certainly.
And that's all we have for you tonight. Thank you for watching Politicat tonight.